Can integrity exist without trust, or can you have trust without integrity? Stay tuned. These are the questions I'm exploring in this conversation. Can you have integrity without trust, or can you have trust? Can you have trust without integrity? Integrity and trust, I don't believe, are the same thing, even though they seem so similar. I don't think the space between them is very much, but they are distinctly different. I think trust is built on a foundation of integrity, but it is possible to have integrity without trust. And I also think it is possible to have trust without integrity. And that may be a little more difficult to see, but we'll explore a little bit more of what all that entails. Let's explore, however, a little further the relationship between trust and integrity, and if and how it's possible to have one without the other. A couple of definitions. I always find the definitions to be really helpful, but in this one here, we're going to be talking about similar aspects on each side that they share, and so I want to keep these quite distinct and different. So as I define integrity this time around, let me sort of stick with three key components that I believe are part of the definition of integrity. So integrity, I would say the three components are: one, being honest; two, having strong moral principles; and three, expressing these consistently. So there's the honesty piece in integrity, there's the moral component, the moral framework or the strong moral principles that one subscribes to, and then thirdly, there is the consistency over which these are expressed over time. That's a really critical component. So honesty and moral principles and consistency are part of what make up integrity for me. Integrity, I think, like I said before, is the foundation for trust. It allows others to rely on us and have faith in each other. Those with integrity are usually seen as trustworthy or dependable, or reliable. These are some of the things I think that can also be said for trust. Trust, I think, is a belief or a perception that something is reliable, truthful, or capable. The key part here, the key distinction I wish to pull between these two, whereas integrity does include honesty like trust does, and whereas integrity also has consistency, as does trust. I think what trust doesn't inherently incorporate is the commitments to one's moral framework. That's the key distinction between the two. So trust is the belief or the perception. It's a belief or a perception that someone or something is reliable, truthful, and capable. But it doesn't really incorporate, like integrity, that moral framework inherent in it. Trust, I think, is built over time through consistency, just like integrity is. And there's, of course, elements of transparency and honesty, just like integrity has, that are infused in trust. Trust is helpful in creating some meaningful relationships and helping people to work together. So that's part of what you build. You build trust over time. But it's that perception or that belief that someone or something is reliable, that they're truthful, and that they are capable. So again, just to clarify, the difference I believe between trust and integrity is whereas trust incorporates honesty, it incorporates consistency. These are also inherent in integrity, that consistency and that honesty piece. But I don't think trust, like integrity, incorporates that nuance of a moral framework that's infused. Let me see if I can give you some examples. I think it's possible that a person can be trusted for either positive qualities, in which case that's accruing to their integrity, because now you're thinking of positive values versus values that are negative, and the positive values that one commits to in a consistent way that builds up trustworthiness can now be translated into integrity, because now you have the moral framework of someone who's committing to positive moral values. But I think someone can also be trustworthy in applying negative character expressions or character deficits, if you will. Say, for example, you have an individual who is repeatedly tardy. They are often late. They never make their appointments on time, and they're consistent. They can be trusted. Do you see how I use that word there? They can be trusted to always be late. And so people usually who are in interactions or connections with those individuals will brace for that tardy component. And they'll say things like, yep, so-and-so can always be trusted to be late. 10 minutes late all the time. That's a way that I can see trust being extended both positively and negatively. I don't think the same can be said for integrity. Integrity usually has that moral framework infused in it, whereby a person's commitment to the positive progression of character development is inherently present. And that's why I defined integrity as having strong moral principles, and that component of strong moral principles is usually translated into the positive category, not the negative category. So a person can be trusted, for example, to either be on time all the time or ahead of time all the time, or they can be trusted to always be late, for example. And that's how I see that word trust being used. Trust is that belief or perception that someone or something is reliable. They can be late reliably, or they can be on time reliably. They're truthful. They're not hiding the fact that they're late, for example, if they are always late, but they're also capable. They're capable of always being consistent in this department. They're always late, however much they're late. So that's the difference. I hope I've been able to spell out the difference between integrity and trust. And so the question again that we're coming back to is, can you have integrity without trust? Or by contrast, can you have trust without integrity? That's where we sort of take a deeper dive here. Integrity and trust are closely related, but they are not the same thing, as I've just been showing. It is possible to have integrity without trust. I believe it's a bit more difficult to have trust without integrity. Let me see if I can spell those out. I think it's possible to have integrity without trust, and there's a couple of key ways that I was thinking about this. Some time back, and maybe I don't know, I haven't figured out yet how to like put a little video card up here or here. I don't know how to do that, so I'll still try to figure that out. But if I'm unable, I will try to link it at the end of this video here. But some time back, I described the difference between what I called bad quality integrity and good quality integrity. And the very heart of that explanation centered around good quality integrity, meaning that there's a consistency inherent in one's pursuit of expressing and experiencing integrity, whereas bad quality, in contrast, was the lack of consistency. Whereas in good quality, there's a consistent pursuit of it. In bad quality, there's an inconsistent pursuit of integrity. And so for me, bad quality integrity does not mean the absence of integrity. It just means that it's inconsistently pursued. It's just a once in a while expression of integrity. So it's still there. The expressions of integrity is just, it's just not consistent, which diminishes its compelling nature. And that's why I called it bad quality integrity. So I would say bad quality integrity is an example where it's possible to have integrity without trust. When one is committed haphazardly to pursuing integrity, that means they're only doing it once in a while. It's not really good quality integrity. It's not very compelling. And that inconsistency, or that lack of consistency, is what contributes to the diminishing of trust, even though integrity is still present. So I think it's possible to have integrity without trust, especially if that pursuit and expression of integrity is occasional, if it's not consistent. That inconsistency really hammers at the foundation of trust inherent in that expression of integrity. And so that's why that's one example that I propose where you can have integrity without trust. A second example that I thought of where you can have integrity without trust is where you may not be very well known. Say, for example, you are starting a new job and you're bringing your integrity that you know you have, but others don't know it yet. They haven't experienced you consistently to be able to determine if you have this consistency piece that builds and accrues in the trust category. And that takes some time. So in the cases of unfamiliarity where you're interacting with people who don't know you well, they may not be ready to hand over trust until they see consistency over a span of time with you pursuing integrity. And only then does that base of trust continue to build. So that's another example where you can have integrity without trust because people just don't know enough. They don't have enough data points yet to determine if you are that kind of an individual that they want to extend trust to. A third example that I thought of is very similar to my story. So when I first pressed that reset button of integrity in my life some years back, something I anticipated and that came to fruition with full force was that I was going to lose all trust that I'd managed to build. I had a reputation. I had success in my career. I was perceived as someone who was well put together. I had built all this on a foundation of sand. It was very unstable. It was very fragile because I was not living with integrity at the time. So what I had there was lack of integrity, unbeknownst to everyone else, because they thought I had integrity. And I had this massive amount of trust that I'd been able to garner through dishonesty. And when I decided that I needed to do a reset of my life, that really scary decision, when I stood in front of the mirror and said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do this. And the cost is going to be significant. It's going to be great. It's going to be devastating. At that point, when I initiated and pressed that button, that reset button, that jump-started my commitment to living with integrity and speaking truthfully, that entailed me speaking the truth to all that I had deceived. And as I did so, trust crumbled and I lost all trust then. And so that was another example of me, for example, experiencing integrity without having any trust. And for me, that was just because I was at the beginning of my journey of integrity. I was just beginning this whole journey in integrity, but I didn't have consistency. I was just at the very beginning. I knew I was committed to it, and I was driven to carry on through all the journeys and lessons that integrity was going to lead me through, but I had no consistency under my belt. And with lack of consistency there was no trust that others were going to extend towards me, especially when I'd broken trust with everyone that I'd already known. And so it was just a matter of time of applying myself consistently to accrue trust again, little by little. And I'm not sure, there may be many in my past who still will refuse to grant trust to me because so devastatingly did I shatter their trust, that it may take a long time if ever I'm able to regain it. But what I was able to do was be able to start building trust in different spheres, to the point now a few years later where I feel I have tremendous credibility. I feel I have transparency. And the key thing is I've been able to pursue this consistently over time. And this is a part of who I am now. This is why I highly value that integrity piece. That's why I focus this whole channel on this theme of integrity. So here are some examples that I've just shared about how it is possible, I believe, to have integrity without trust. The good news I will share with you at the end of the video. Stay tuned. But let me talk a little bit about the other way around. Is it possible to have trust without integrity? This is a little more tricky, I think. It's a little more difficult. Let me see if I can explain how it's possible to have trust without integrity. I think it's possible to have trust without integrity because it can be granted in the absence of the critical component that integrity has that trust does not have. Let me break that down. It's possible to have trust without integrity because trust can be extended even in the absence of what integrity has that trust doesn't have, and that is strong moral commitments or principles or convictions that one may subscribe to. I was defining trust earlier, and in that definition, I was proposing that trust doesn't necessarily include the necessity of moral convictions in the positive category that one subscribes to. I think trust can be had when those are absent. So if trust is the belief or the perception that someone or something is reliable, truthful, and honest, and capable, I think it's possible to have trust without integrity because a person can be trusted because of their consistency in the way that they're behaving, because of the honesty with which they're approaching their behavior, even though it doesn't have any of those positive character traits that we would accrue to integrity. And I gave some examples. I'll stick with the example that I had before. Like I said, it's possible for someone to be habitually tardy and late in their engagement and their appointments. And they can be trusted to always be this way because that's the way they are. Maybe they take a long time getting ready. Maybe they sleep in. Maybe for whatever reason, they are always late. And they own it. They're like, hey, I'm always late. They're being honest about it. And they're being consistent about it. And so as they interact with their community, they are accrued trust in that category where they're always going to be expected to be late. So that when others are interacting with them and making plans, they can say something like, yep, so-and-so, they're always going to be here. You can trust them that they're going to be here 10 minutes late. So let's buffer for that or calibrate for that. But there is that way that trust can be extended in the absence of integrity. And integrity, I mean, that individual is being honest about it, which is good, but they're still struggling in that area too. So that's one scenario in which I think it's possible to have trust without integrity. You could take this a little further to more serious character defects that may be expressed. Say an individual, the one I seem to always go to, and I think it's probably because I've had some familiarity with this one here once upon a time. Once upon a time, I used to have an anger problem personally. I had an anger problem that expressed itself violently, not outside the home, but it definitely inside the home against my two brothers at the time that I had it, you know, as my primary points of expending that energy. So I used to be an extremely angry person once upon a time. And I lacked the skill set to express appropriately those emotions that I found difficult. And so I used to lash out. I used to vent. I used to like just really put it out there. And maybe that's the reason I go to this example often. But a person can be trusted to be violently reactive when they're provoked. And that's not a positive character trait at all. They may own it saying, don't do this because this is the way I'm going to respond kind of thing. And that's not a good thing. And yet they can be consistent and capable of pulling forth that response. And you can say that they can be trusted that this is the way they're always going to be because of that consistency of how they respond this way with this character defect. So therein is another example, a little more serious, of how you can have trustworthiness, that you're always going to be this way, even though it's not really helpful or beneficial, and yet still lack integrity. Trust without integrity, I believe, can exist in those settings. That's how I was thinking about that scenario. It's a little more difficult to nuance, but I think it still holds, especially if one is willing to accept my definition of trust in the absence of strong moral convictions or beliefs that one subscribes to. So yes, it is possible, I believe, to have integrity without trust, and it's possible to have trust without integrity. but it is not going to be strong enough to maintain or develop good foundational relationships. But my question is, why must we consider just having one or the other? Why not consider having both? Isn't it a better combination to go for both and having both trust and integrity? I think it's very much worthwhile. In fact, it's especially worthwhile when you consider that both integrity and trust on their own already require a massive investment of energy and commitment and investment, especially in the consistency piece of which they demand their expressions take place. But integrity, I believe, is essential, an essential pursuit, even though it's only part of the equation. So let me take you back again to the earlier example that I used. When I first pressed that reset button in my life, where I pressed that integrity reset button to embark on this new journey of integrity, that was really critical. That was so essential for me to say, I'm all in now. I'm wanting to pursue integrity in my life for the long haul. And as I made that commitment, I still lacked consistency. I still didn't have the trust capital. That was going to come over time. Now, I can't make time go faster where I can like do it. I think it's that Adam Sandler movie called Click, where he is able to click the remote control and all of a sudden like he can jump through like uncomfortable seasons in his life to bypass them. We don't have that option. We have to just kind of wait for each second, each minute to take its methodical space in existence to work through that consistency piece. So we can't rush this process, but it's essential for us to commit to integrity even when trust may not be there. We build trust through consistency in our actions and behaviors, but it's not only about building trust, it's about being intentional about understanding what one's moral framework that they subscribe to is. How well do you know yourself and what your deep convictions are that you want to be consistent in living and fleshing out. Blending trust with integrity by being honest, reliable, and transparent. That's the definition of trust we were saying. As well as being willing to admit our mistakes and our responsibilities while we apply ourselves to a moral framework that we find compelling, is this happy amalgamation of these both and with trust and integrity. Number one, trust incorporates honesty, transparency, and reliability. Yes, it's important to have those three, but infuse those with integrity, which also adds on that component of what moral conviction do you subscribe to? How well do you know what that is? And how do you flesh that out in your life? And how do you pursue that consistently? And how well do you also pursue taking accountability for when you drop the ball? How well do you take responsibility for your actions and admit your mistakes as you pursue what this integrity plus trust looks like in your life? Integrity and trust, I would say, are closely related. They're not the same thing though. And pursuing both end is the sweet spot. When you can be trusted to be a person of integrity, that's a beautiful thing to have said about you. It is possible. I was having a conversation last night with some friends, and they brought out a really interesting observation that I'm personally working on, and I want to flesh this out with you guys because I think it's an important part that I don't do very well, but I want to keep getting better at. As we were having, conversations on different themes of integrity that I was facilitating, one of them said, this is like really heady stuff, and this individual is finding it particularly difficult to like keep present in the conversation because they're like, this is not where my engagement is. And yes, I would acknowledge that I do really well in this element where I think deeply and I love digging and understanding and making sense logically of these ideas. But for me, that's where I usually start, and I relish that. But I don't just keep it there in the theoretical. I also try to apply it in my life experientially. And that's why I love doing what I do and sharing and talking to you about these things, because I'm not talking about what ideas look like. I'm talking about things I've actually experienced and gone through. But what I don't do very often is I don't talk about how I feel in the moments, or how I felt in those moments before when I was going through these things. So let me just take a little snap back here and describe some of the feelings that I had once upon a time. And this is the good news, by the way, because I was just mentioning earlier that I would touch on some good news. This is the good part where it doesn't necessarily have to be just ideas, but it can actually touch your feelings. Once upon a time, when I didn't have integrity, but I had lots of trust, I felt divided. I felt like a fake. I felt like I lacked consistency. I felt like a fraud. I felt worthless as a result of all these things. I felt like I had no value. I felt a tremendous sense of isolation. And I wanted deeply to feel connected. I wanted to feel loved, but I didn't feel lovable because I did not know what it was like to live with integrity. So that was me before, for decades. When I had the epiphany that I needed to press that reset button in my life, when circumstances, as I've shared in my story in past videos, excuse me a second. I don't apologize. I don't apologize for being emotional. I want to normalize expressing emotions because I think it's an important part of our expression as humans. And I don't subscribe to the narrative that you and I may have grown up with saying, hey, we're not supposed to express emotion, especially because it makes others feel uncomfortable. Well, I want to normalize it. And so practice with me if you would. When I decided to press the reset button in my life, there was tremendous fear of the unknown, tremendous fear that I was going to lose everything that I loved the most. Fear as well that I was not going to be able to handle what was coming my way. But there was also a stronger sense of desperation that I wanted to feel again inside, what honesty with myself first and foremost looked like, and honesty also with those around me. I was also very hopeful that this was going to be good for me. This was going to be good in the sense that something foundational was going to shift inside of me and my existence that was worth the loss of so much that I valued in my life already. So I was hopeful that this was a good call that I was making, that I could finally live honestly and not have to fake or lie or live with dishonesty. So there was tremendous fear, but hopefulness as well. And then now, here on this side of this present moment where I'm at, where I believe I have trust and integrity, there's just this tremendous sense of unity inside and relief that I don't have to pretend anymore, that I don't have to be dishonest. There's this tremendous sense of freedom that I experience. There's this tremendous sense of openness, of contentment, of joy, of confidence, of courage. There's just been so much that's been accrued as a result of all this. And can I tell you, it's worth it. scary if you're on the other side, but it's worth it. And so I wanted to just go through that exercise and keep practicing this exercise of that feeling component, because that's something I'm still trying to practice. It's there, but I don't express it often enough. And I'd like to do that, especially because I think that's a healthy form of communication and expression. And I also want to be able to share with you, especially those of you who value the feelings component too, the necessity there. So it's possible to have integrity without trust. It's possible to have trust without integrity. But my question to you is, why not have both? Why not have both and commit to a life where you can start experiencing some tremendous growth, some personal growth that reaches deep inside and attends to those spaces that haven't been touched for a very long time. Spaces where you can be seen for who you truly are and accepted for who you truly are, beginning with yourself. Yourself looking in the mirror, not yourself beating yourself down, but yourself saying, hey, I'm legitimate in my existence and I'm worthwhile in pursuing something more. I believe that for you, and I want to see you through that process. I want to encourage and inspire you along those lines. If you haven't already done so, like I usually encourage, subscribe, join along, because I'm intentionally building a community that values these kind of conversations, but not only these conversations, these kind of experiences. That's what we're aiming for. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.